The juxtaposition, or I'll attempt to, this presentation will be an attempt to juxtapose um, mythos, alethes in Homer and archaic and classical thought with the Freudian, Zizekian humor or jokes. So first of all, in Odyssey, we have the Tiresias incident in the underworld where the word alethes is used by Odysseus, who I identify with Hermes, and Hermes is a kind of thief, and he's a sort of known for, it was considered a daring exploit and something that could bring glory or kleos to the doer to raid herdsmen and take their flocks. So Hermes was identified with that. I identify this personality with types like Columbo saying Peter Falk himself, especially when you see Peter Falk as in the two episodes where he played off against William Shatner, where you see the difference between a sort of Apollonian William Shatner, extroverted in the light, as it were, as against the Hermes type, which is more hidden and more to make a metonymy, sort of as a Columbo is a metonymy on Hermes, and if Derrida were Columbo, then you could sort of see what this Hermes type is like. But that's, I include that to show that these types are not, that the mythological type, that the mythos is speaking of a generalization of human character, that human character still exists, and we see it in every generation, and in every, not just in every generation, but in every group of people. And then any relatively large group of people, you'll see these types repeated in different variations, in different forms. So Odysseus, or Ulysses in the Latinized version, asked Tiresias to tell Tiresias, known as a prophet, to have vaticinations, to tell him directly, to give him the alethes. So he uses the word alethes instead of the mythos. He already has the mythos, but he regards the mythos sort of as secondhand. Give me the alethes instead, because you've seen it. You're a seer. As the Greek is a mantis. So give it to me directly. So the alethes is in that, at least in that passage, contrasted with the mythos. There's a long discussion about that. Heidegger is accused of making some mistake, but then later his accuser, the German philologist, has retracted that accusation, and then there's some exchange, and then Heidegger, I think, with the excessive graciousness that's associated with this Prussian scholarly exchanges, then also says, "Oh, I'm also honored to say that that you brought out some questionable things about what I've said," and then some other people chime in, and I think this is often just about alethes or aletheia. This is often said Heidegger's made some mistake here, but if you look more closely at this exchange, I think it's with Kruger, is his name. You see it's more nuanced, but alethes has different. They call it the philologists now like to speak of semantic fields, and there's an ever-changing manner of analyzing these things and arguing for their meaning. Nobody actually speaks ancient Greek. That should be clear. I mean, that should be said. It's because it's a dead language. People speak scholarly ancient Greek, which means two scholars can have a conversation in scholarly ancient Greek, and they're fluent in scholarly ancient Greek, but nobody actually speaks ancient Greek. Nobody actually speaks archaic ancient Greek because they don't live there. It's a language it's a dead language. You could see this theme developed in I think in Schleiermacher has developed this theme thoroughly. That nobody actually speaks these ancient languages because they all have to be constructed out of arguments, and the ones that speak them are the ones that have picked up the meanings that have been putatively construed by generations of scholars. But the current view is, looking at the passages, that there's a bunch of different semantic fields in play, or different situations of context which make us think, okay, alethes and aletheia already had a number of different meanings, and then this is very complicated because the archaic languages often were more simple, and the number of words they had, there's less synonyms, or less near synonyms, but that doesn't mean that the writer didn't think. That doesn't mean that Homer, or let's not get into that, but I know about the Milman Parry stuff, but let's not get into that, but that the author or authors or singers of the Iliad weren't thinking different things when they composed these lines, that sometimes the same word is used, but it seems to suggest through context or through grammar that they meant it the same thing in totally different or in nuanced ways, because they just they stretched the meaning out of the limited vocabulary to make it mean different things, which later on would be formalized through new vocabulary. And one always has this interesting question of synonyms being exact, or of their usage being sort of near synonyms, or of how words that are I mean, if I say I shoe something, do I say the same thing as if I say I abjure something? Not exactly. And then if you have an ear for it, you see super subtle, extremely nuanced differences between abjuring and eschewing, for instance. Whereas maybe an ancient language would only have one word for that, but then the author might give it different meanings. The author might think it differently. This is already, and it's clear that this is already, Socrates is already thinking about that a lot, and then we have the Euthydemus as the primary text on that. Which, by the way, Samuel Skolnikov and Leo Strauss considered one of the most important, probably after the Republic. Maybe Skolnikov said actually after the Republic it's the most important Platonic text, even though many people consider it humorous and just a throwaway text. And Strauss also has devoted seminars to it, teaching it to his students. But I think, so having established that we have this mythos as against the lethes, then it seems to me that the joke also has this obscure character. So Zizek, and I think it's already Freud has brought this out, that the joke often has no author, seemingly. So that's where I think there's a direct homology on mythos. Mythos seems to come from nobody. There's nobody credited with being the writer of it, unless Homer is. But see, I don't think most people think, and I don't think in antiquity people thought of Homer as inventing these stories. It's like there's a bunch of guys that are writing about things like Odysseus, about the Trojan War, about Achilles, and already long prior to Hesiod, long prior to Aeschylus, or Euripides. But somehow these are already, just like today in China, you have, for instance, the ghost religions, which are not part of the standard Tao or Tao Te Ching or Confucianism or what's the third one? There's three big standard ones that are always named with respect to China, right? But then there's these other local things like the ghost religions, which are in the countryside and all over. And so I think somehow these, it's not obvious where these myths that we point to Homer and point to other authors to say, here's instances of their, where we can look at them, but they don't seem like they're supposed to be or origin. It's not like Homer is supposed to be the genius who wrote these myths. It's more like this mythos, or this word, are these truths, but they come from some other source, and they present themselves as though they were related by the common people about things that really happened, but just not, they're just not passed down by the person that actually saw them. Whereas Odysseus says, you actually saw these things, Tiresias, tell me about it. So the same with the joke is, this is the feature that this Freudian tradition, Orthodox Freudianism, as Zizek calls it, I think that's something Lacan said too, if I'm not mistaken, that somehow he's continuing the Orthodox Freudianism on developing it. How do you say that in German? There's a word for the capacity to be developed of a thinker. But in any case, they claim to be genuinely developing it out of this Freudian tradition of saying that the joke in a way has no author, and therefore you can link it to the, in their case, to the theory of the unconscious, which is a materialist theory based on sort of derivative on Ernst Haeckel's version of Darwin and this kind of thing. In the joke, we have this mix, so then of course we do have lots of jokes that are, the author says, I made this joke, the author makes the joke themselves, it works, the comedian. But I think, so that would be a question for somebody like Zizek to answer, is like, what's the difference between a joke that's deliberately developed by a comedian and gets a laugh, and the jokes that he seems to focus on where he's talking about, like, oh, there's this sort of myth that there's a joke from the time of the dissident radios during the Soviet period, and for instance a joke about the guy that's always walking out of the factory with the wheelbarrow, and they check the wheelbarrow, they ask them lift it up, make sure nothing's taped under it, nothing's in it, okay, go along, and then eventually they realize what he was stealing is the wheelbarrow. Or these funny jokes about the guys won a prize, but then it turns out it's not actually a prize, but a jail sentence, and it's not actually a jail sentence, but it's bayonet in the eye or something. This type of jokes that seem to not have it, that nobody can say who the original author was, or somehow that Jesus doesn't think it's important to say who the original author was. It's probably the same way with the mythos. If you were to say in the countryside, so here's where the first person who heard this, that would be like a Brothers Grimm situation of gathering folk wisdom or something. Okay, that's all I have to say on that, but I think it's a good trio sort of thematization that might be somehow have a capacity for development.